capitalism is, the answer to capitalism would give you is as many as the, say it with me, market can sustain. And then, which isn't really true, because corporations can afford to lose money one place, as long as they're making enough money in another place, just to have a presence in that one place that they're losing money. And so they can absorb the cost, whereas a small business couldn't absorb. If they're losing money, they have one location, they're going to close. And corporations have played on our fears as well, corporations and the economic system. When I say corporations, by the way, I should stress that I mean capitalism. My thing, there's some cows down there doing their thing. I wonder if there's any cow flop down there with some magic mushrooms. But the economic system is simply this, that there is never enough. There's never enough Starbucks. There's never enough. If there's even the slightest need for it, it will show up. And they can afford to, like I said, lose money one place and make money another place, and it never goes away. Thus destroying small businesses, creating monopolies. Bob's your uncle, there's capitalism. What did Rockefeller say? Nelson, I believe, was it Nelson or John D? John D said, competition's a sin. And he would know. You try to put the other guy out of business, and if you have to lose money doing it, so be it, because other parts of your corporation are making money. So that's California in a nutshell. And by the way, that's the United States in a nutshell. I'm going to put up some of the stuff that by the way, these things smell like weed. Whatever these are, I have to look these up because they smell like pot. But whatever economic system that we're currently finding ourselves in is a product of that idea of capitalism being never enough. There's never enough. You always have to grow. Every year you have to see a growth, or people don't buy your stock. And CEOs are legally mandated to maximize their stock price. It's a vicious circle. It's a lizard eating its own tail. It's a snake eating its own tail. And it never stops. And now in 2017, and I said I'm going to post some stuff about Steinbeck and the Steinbeck Center, because I was in Salinas. John Steinbeck, of course, wrote Of Mice and Men, Travels with Charlie, Grapes of Wrath, Tortilla Flats, East of Eden. I mean, I can keep going on and on. And his whole books are about class warfare. And Steinbeck makes a point. He traveled around the country with his dog named Charlie in a truck. I believe it was in the 50s, or I can't remember exactly the year, right? 60-ish. And he wanted to see America. And he says, I didn't want to see America on the freeways. I didn't want to travel the main roads. I wanted to talk to the people, observe church services, sit at a hamburger stand and talk to the people. And what the conclusion he essentially came to is the same conclusion that you will come to if you drive around the United States in 2017. Now think about that for a moment, won't you? 60 years later, it's the same place. He makes the point, there's the same hamburger stands, the same that they're not independently owned. Of course they're independently, family-owned businesses, etc., which I try to frequent more than I would frequent anywhere else. We're all guilty of going to a Sizzler and having, you can't avoid them sometimes. Going to Starbucks and getting coffee, whatever your thing is. Chevron, Shell, Sinclair, all these places. And they're owned by individuals, but essentially they're a franchise. And that's the same thing, okay? Because they're dictated to what to sell, what products they're allowed to sell and not allowed to sell, how much they need to charge for their gas, what the minimums will be, etc. There are places, Monterey, California being one of them, which I find beautiful. Monterey is stunning. It's where Cannery Row is. It's where it's gorgeous. I can't even express to you how beautiful it is. Here's the problem with Monterey. Gas prices in some places are $4 a gallon. You then drive an hour away and the gas prices magically lower to $3 a gallon, $2.85 a gallon, $2.75 a gallon, because they can. Because they're allowed to gouge people because of, say it with me, capitalism and supply of demand. And if people in Monterey are on vacation and they need to fill up their rental car I'm going to try to walk up this hill. If I fall, I'm capturing it all, and this will be my last will and testament. I hate capitalism and I hate America. That's my last will and testament. All my stuff goes to my sister, all my sisters and brothers out there in the working classes. But you don't get a chance or an opportunity to have anything make sense. Gas prices should be universal. They should be $3 and $2.80. Number one, gas prices should be about $2 a barrel, $2 a gallon, excuse me, with the barrel of oil being what it's at. In New Orleans, you see this. When I was in New Orleans, they were $2 a gallon. And then you get to the more affluent areas and they raise them up. And that's wrong to me, because fuel is the lifeblood of our economy, and it's the lifeblood of economics. How do you get to work? How do you deliver? How do trucks deliver? How do the things that we need get to where we need them to be to survive and keep going and thrive? So I think gas prices should be universal. I know that's collusion, because capitalism doesn't want that. It's only called collusion when two little companies do it, but it's not collusion when companies collude not to keep things the same price. See what I'm saying? And I know how that sounds, and it's a little bit of a contradiction in thought, but think about it. The government should go in and say, no, every gas station only can charge, because of when a barrel of oil gets to this level, the gas needs to be this price everywhere. And this leads to price gouging, and this leads to, again, say it with me, supply and demand. And that's just one example of this. A gallon of milk. Now, I can understand if you live somewhere rurally that there's very few people, that it should be much, much cheaper, but in some cases it's much more expensive. And then sometimes when you're in a place with a lot of people, because there's a large demand, the prices are high when it should be lower because of the volume. It doesn't make sense, but it only makes sense if you're a capitalist or a psychopath or an economist. And it's so very true that none of it really makes any sense. That none of it really has any logic or reason or rationality to it. It's all illogical, and we're all living in a madhouse. We're all living in Arkham Asylum and trying to find our Joker, our leader, to shake up the system. And I'm not a big Batman fan. I'm not trying, I'm not some comic book guy who loves talking about, but it's an analogy that I think is appropriate. We want someone to lead us out of the madhouse and lead us into society and change things and disrupt it. And it's not going to happen until there's a major cataclysm, like a asteroid destroying, major cities, or something to that effect. Now, I'm going to make an example here. As we're panning out here, look at all the land that's available. Do you see it? Why aren't they building low-income housing here? This is San Luis Obispo. It's an incredibly expensive place to live. Where is the low-income housing? Where's HUD? Where's nonprofit housing? Where is the government? Where are your tax dollars really going? For those goddamn obnoxious freeways? Well, let me give you a little bad bit of news if you've never been to California. And I'm sure this is, again, happening where you live. The freeways in California are in such bad shape, you run over potholes doing 70 miles an hour. Now, think about that. You're in a car and you are potentially putting everybody else on that road at risk because of a pothole that is not being fixed. Why isn't the pothole being fixed? Where is your tax dollars going? Where are your property taxes going? Where is all of it going? And who's not paying taxes? I mean, I'm panning over a church here. I'm panning in these areas that take up huge swaths of the land and pay very little tax. I'm not talking about farmers, but again, how much wine do we need? How much cash crops do we need? Ones that don't benefit us, don't make us healthy. Corn's great, but it's turned into high fructose corn syrup. Well, that causes type 2 diabetes, thus affecting the society that we live in, making healthcare costs higher, making people need to becoming more dependent on free or cheap healthcare. When somebody has absolutely no money, they make $1,200 a month or $1,500 a month, and their money is, they're living on credit cards, or make $2,000 a month and have a family or whatever, maybe joint incomes, they make $3,000, and every dollar is accounted for, and they hurt themselves. Or they do get diabetes, or they get MS from the environmental damage. I'm not saying it's not genetic, but I'm saying you get some neurological disease from something. What the fuck then? Well, then they go to an emergency room and have no money to pay, and emergency rooms are legally obligated to help you, which they should be. And then you get on public assistance, and say it with me, you become a person who benefits from socialized medicine. Do you know anybody? Oh, look at that butterfly. Can you see the butterfly? That's beautiful. Are you I mean, how many people do we know? And California is full of it. People are living to an older age. So older people cannot afford the healthcare, and they can't afford to retire on their Social Security. So they go try to find places like the Salton Sea to live in. Environmentally degraded, destroyed. Goodbye, butterfly. Butterflies, free to ramble, whatever that line is. But so there's this need and an increasing. We're all living older. We're all living longer, and you can't retire in anywhere near where a city. So you have to go out to some environmental nightmare like the Salton Sea and buy up a cheap house, and then you become a snowbird if you can afford that. Which, I mean, that's ridiculously expensive to run an RV. You ever bought, what do they get, 9-12 miles of the gallon if you're lucky? So, and gas prices again, we go right back into the same circle. It's capitalism. Nobody escapes it. And we, of course, all know we need to move to a single payer. We all need to raise the taxes on the rich and lower it on the poor and the working classes. But that's class warfare. And in America, you're not allowed to engage in class warfare unless you're rich. Then it's encouraged, because then you can raise prices, you can price gouge, you can do whatever because of, say it with me, capitalism is supply and demand. And it's all a trick. It's a very, and I'll say this, I believe this to be true now after seeing California, because I lived in the Alaska bubble for so long. There's not very many homeless people in Alaska. There are. Predominantly, they are native Alaskans, ironically, who have come to the city because the villages have become too expensive to live. And they become addicted to drugs, whatever, fall between the cracks. These are people who have lived in subsistence their entire lives. And now they can't in Anchorage. You couldn't possibly. So they end up being homeless. They end up being marginalized. They end up being pushed to the boundaries and the sides, and people ignore them. In California, the same thing exists. And I'm starting to believe, this is not a conspiracy theory, I just think it's part of the capitalist culture, that exists because it's kind of a warning. You either get the 30-year mortgage, go into debt going to school, get a job that sucks, it's terrible, or you end up like that. You don't get to chase your dreams. You don't get to sit home and invent and create. You are now a victim of a society that throws at one end the carrot, beautiful cars, beautiful homes, lawns, the idea of America, the goodness of it, and then on the other side, homeless people. Do you want to end up living under a freeway in Los Angeles? And there's a place called Slab City, which I don't know if we're going to go visit, but we might. That's basically a lot of people that the economics have destroyed. In 2006, when the economy started to go bad, and it's located in south of, kind of in between, well, I was just out there and we didn't know it until we looked it up, but it's kind of located near the Salton Sea, on the other side of the Salton Sea. And it's the Slab City. They call it Slab City because the military built a bunch of slabs of concrete there, and people have just set up communities without having anything to do with the government. And a lot of them live on disability, a lot of them Social Security, and a lot of them just don't live on anything. And they have a makeshift barter trades kind of a system, and it's legitimately a big city. And it's people who have just fallen between the cracks. And that's the sad, unbearable truth, is that someplace like that can exist and everybody's just fine with it. They're far enough out of the way, no one has to see them, and fuck how they're living, fuck the kids that are there, fuck the old people that are there, fuck the people that are my age that are there. Fuck them. Fuck them. They're not important. They're not going to earn in our society. Well, fuck them. And that is depressingly sad, because I think I'm as far as I can go up. Yeah, see the fence? And it's depressing, because if you love human beings, and I think we all love human beings, I mean, there's some misanthropic people, but I think misanthropy becomes, people always want to throw that out at people. Well, you're misanthropic because you bitch and complain about the way the system is or the way people are set up. I'm misanthropic towards rich people. Not every rich person's bad, and not every poor person's good. But we have this idea that rich people, because they make money, they're better. Because they were willing to go into debt. Because they were They created some, Bill Gates makes $85 million a year just on his investments, just on a dividends. He gets a check, I mean, excuse me, $85 million a week. Somebody gives Bill Gates a check for $85 million a week, just on his investments. That's not right. It isn't okay. And you can't have a system that continues to do this and pretend that that's okay. And pretend and just keep whistling past the graveyard. I've said this before. It's going to get to a point in this country, and I don't know how far off it is. Bill Gates' house is going to be burnt to the ground. And I mean metaphorically and literally. There's going to be a reckoning, and rich people have got, some see it, but most don't, and they don't care. And now you have an influx of people from other countries because of globalization who want the same thing Americans have had for the last 30 to 40 years and are willing to sacrifice even more than Americans are to have it. And it creates, and then you have the inheritance tax issues, and then you have all of the things, and people tax dodging, and because they can afford to, because they can hire attorneys like Donald Trump did, and others, many other millionaires and billionaires don't pay their fair share. They use all of our natural resources more than we do. What do you think Bill Gates' house uses electricity-wise a month? Or his gas bill, or his air conditioning bill, or his private planes, or the area where he has his private airport, or the roads that travel, that deliver products that are made by Apple, for instance, or any of these companies? They travel more than you do back and forth to work every day. So, but they don't pay their fair share. And in fact, they want to pay less tax. People like Warren Buffett have pointed this out, and good on Warren Buffett, but he's part of the problem too. He's part of what Marx referred to as the bourgeois class. He's not living on his labor, he's living on investments, dividends from investments. We're living on our labor. And there's more of us by far than there are of them, but we don't see it because we're too busy trying to make a living and survive. It's sad, it's depressing, and it becomes, when you get to 40 years old, you're kind of thinking about retirement, and you're thinking about the future, and you're thinking that I'm not made of steel, and I'm not going to live forever, and I'm not going to be able to live on my labor for the rest of my life. You start to feel human. You start to feel mortal. When you're a kid, fuck man, you can live like this fuck yeah man, I can live like, I'll always be able to earn. I'll always be able to, and then you get an injury, or you get sick, or you get ill, or you just get older, and it becomes evident that that's not going to be possible. And you see people around you retiring and having what they've had to sacrifice to retire, and where they have to retire and where they have to settle, and it's sad. This video also, I want to talk about Donald Trump real quick, because I haven't done videos about Trump. I've been kind of getting more existential in my videos and trying to show places I've been. That's going to be some of the stuff I post. I've been collecting a lot of video on my GoPro, as I'm doing now. I want to talk about Donald Trump in Syria. Let's be real clear about Donald Trump in Syria. This is a project for a new American century continuation. That's all it is. People blamed the neoconservatives for all of the world's problems, the invasion of Iraq, the invasion of Afghanistan, all the things. They aren't the ones doing it. Foreign policy does not come from the University of Chicago. It comes from the Pentagon. It comes from Virginia. It comes from Langley. It comes from the CIA. And this idea that a bunch of guys got together and created American foreign policy, which, by the way, was the same American foreign policy that we've always had, spreading capitalism in the guise of freedom all over the world. You have to understand that they are not creating the policy. It's a reinforcement of the policy in a way that seems like, well, see, your politicians are actually the ones doing it, when it's the military. Because the military is the ones doing it. They're the ones that are continuing the same goddamn policies that they've always had. That's it. That's all. Nothing more simple, nothing more tricky than that. This is what the Pentagon has always wanted. And Syria is not part of the International Monetary Fund World Bank system. Either is North Korea, by the way. And so they don't want their countries to be turned into debt farms like the rest of the world, like South America, like Mexico. The reason there's so much immigration from Mexico into America, and it's slowing down, by the way, but the reason there was is because the IMF destroyed Mexico. Absolutely destroyed it. And it's a shame that places like Democracy Now! Don't talk about this enough, or at all sometimes, because George Soros and the open source, his little tax dodge, is a propaganda arm of the World Bank and IMF. It's a big fan of it. And so, of course, they're not going to discuss the World Bank or the IMF. And of course, they're not going to discuss the real purpose of the IMF and the World Bank. And Syria doesn't want to be part of it. A lot of those countries that were on the Project for New American Century that are on the list don't want to be part of it. They don't want to be part. They don't want to be turned into slaves for corporations, etc. And then go into massive debt. Then the IMF calls in their loans. They say, we can't pay this debt. And the IMF says, no problem. We want you. And by the way, a great book about this is Economic Hitman by John Perkins. We are going to just privatize everything. Take all your social systems that you had, your farming, your land, your labor, etc. Deregulate everything and let us in, and we will, that'll be how you start to cover your debt. And you'll never be debt free, but you can start to pay down the debt. See, aren't we noble? Aren't we good? Aren't we helpful? And in fact, it's the opposite. It's a way of getting into countries that you could never get into before. And it's a way of ruining people economically that would never accept it militarily. And then you have the military-industrial complex, the Pentagon, etc. They enforce the rules of the IMF, World Bank. So any of these countries get into this kind of debt, and if they don't acquiesce, and John Perkins goes into a couple of places, I think Chile was one of them, but I can point out Chile, Bolivia, Guatemala, Ecuador, etc., 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 just in the South, that said no to a lot of these policies, and then had what Noam Chomsky refers to as gunboat diplomacy. Oh, okay, you don't want to pay the IMF back, you don't want to pay the World Bank back, cool. Do you see that aircraft carrier in your bay? Do you see CNN talking about how you guys are a threat to democracy, and that you're all baby killers, and that you gas your own citizens, and that you're a monster and you're evil? That's what's happening in Syria, and it's happening in North Korea as well. And the threat with North Korea is they figured it out decades ago that they got to go nuclear. A general said, if you're going to go to the war, don't go to war with the United States unless you're a nuclear power, unless you have nuclear weapons. And truer words have never been said. You can't fight the United States unless you're nuclear. And now Donald Trump is even going further than that. And that's not even the case anymore, because the way that the drumbeat towards North Korea is going, and the way the drumbeat, frankly, to Russia as well. And it's not, I know Donald Trump is an agent of Russia, as Keith Olbermann and Rachel Maddow want to keep telling you over and over again. But first of all, it's bullshit. Secondly, is it even impeachable? That's what you have to ask yourself. And third, is it for ratings? Because I look at Keith Olbermann do this, and I like Keith Olbermann. He's doing stuff for Vanity Fair now. I think it's GQ, excuse me, online. And you can watch his stuff on YouTube. And I'm all for Keith Olbermann, man. I like Keith Olbermann. But he's got the right ta-ta, but the wrong ho-ho. he's not in the right way. He's not doing the right things. He's not, and Keith Olbermann is not discussing, spent very little time on healthcare. You know, where is the healthcare talk? Where is the single payer talk? Where is that talk? Well, it doesn't exist in Keith Olbermann's world, apparently. Look at this little quaint swing. I'd sit on this, but it'd snap like a twig, probably. Not being upkept. I think this is all private property anyway, I'm not sure. But, so he's talking about Russia as though, and Rachel Maddow has done this, the Real News Network, and I'll leave a link below, has done a wonderful job pointing out Rachel Maddow and her ridiculous McCarthyistic type of rhetoric about Donald Trump and Russia. I mean, she just is over the top. And by the way, her best ratings have been seen during this time. So her producers, because she is a Rhodes Scholar piece of shit. Let's be honest, Rachel Maddow is not a friend of progressives. She has the illusion. She's seen us, the word seemingly is a friend, but she's not. She's a detriment. It's like Sam Harris. He's not a friend to progressives or liberals. He's the exact opposite. Fareed Zakaria, exact opposite. Richard Dawkins, exactly the opposite. And I don't mean with his genome stuff, and I don't mean with religion. I mean with the way they discuss economics and the way they discuss the Muslim world. That allows the military-industrial complex, who wants to go into these countries anyway, to do, you know, gives them another justification. Well, look at these backwards monsters. We're just trying to bring freedom to women. We're just trying to bring goodness and democracy, and we're trying to make women's lives better. And meanwhile, you can go read an article. There's more women in Muslim countries in positions of power than there is in the United States, by far. And we have our own forms of this kind of repression when it concerns religion in this country. We just don't talk about it because we're in the country. It's like fish describing where they live. The last thing they're gonna say is water. And by the way, there's no money in that. The Pentagon, there's a shitload of money talking about for Sam Harris to go out there and bash Muslims. Shitload of money out there for Richard Dawkins. There's a shitload of money out there for these people to rip apart Muslims, because the military-industrial complex and the CIA, that's what they want, and they encourage it. And they'll get you funded, they'll get you hired, you'll get, and I'm not saying it's not a conspiracy. People want to hear this too. They want it reinforced. People want to believe in their government. That's just what you want to do. You want to be true to your school. You really do. And until you note the hypocrisy of it, you always want to be on the side of the victorious. You always want to be on the side of the majority. Who the fuck wouldn't? Like, you'd have to be insane not to want to be on the side of the majority. You'd have to be insane not to want to be popular, or because it makes life easier. And how the fuck do you believe in your country anymore if that's not the case? Meaning, how do you say, I'm willing to keep paying taxes and I'm willing to just live here and deal with the economic systems that I have to deal with, if my country lies to me about Muslims and Muslim countries, etc., etc., etc. And these little analysts on TV now, Brian Williams, you know, people like that quoting Leonard Cohen songs when they're watching missiles shoot out of aircraft carriers to kill more innocent poor people in some third world hellhole that the military deems geostrategically important. People like Fareed Zakaria and others, Van Jones, all these scumbags who say, well, now this is Trump's president now because he launched bombs and missiles and killed a bunch of people. These guys clearly work for the CIA. They clearly are assets. They're clearly part of, and if they're not, then they're the most evil people that you could possibly imagine. If they're not being paid or have an agenda or have some